The traveler's journey across Teyvat has been going on for a very long time now, and with Natlan's main Archon Quest coming to an end, the countdown for our eventual encounter with Pierro and the Tsaritsa has begun, and I don't foresee it ticking for much longer. What started out as a lone traveler in search of their lost sibling has now evolved drastically, with the Fatui taking on the spotlight in the main storyline pretty much ever since La Signora showed up in Mondstadt and took the Animo Gnosis from the god of freedom, Barbatos. And at this point, the ultimate destination of this journey appears to be leading the main character into an unexpected alliance with the Tsaritsa in her eventual rebellion against Celestia. Since this is the next major plotline after Natlan, according to the Teyvat Travail trailer, I think the time has come for us to start asking how exactly the Fatui plan to overthrow the King of Heaven, and what do the 7 Gnoses have to do with their plan? These are the questions I plan to answer in this video, so let's cut the chase and get right into it, starting with the nature of Celestia's king and its 4 shining shades. To avoid any confusion, I want to first clarify what I mean by the king whenever I bring up this title in the context of the heavenly principles. Also, don't worry, the explanation is really simple, but it's important to understand. As of the time of the recording of this video, Teyvat doesn't have anyone called the King. That is simply a term which I personally use to distinguish a certain part or aspect of the Primordial One, but the King is not officially used by Hoyoverse. This is basically a similar case to when I made the term variance in my analysis of Simulanka to more accurately refer to Hoyoverse's character exports or XPs, where I demonstrate how Acheron, Scaramouche, Beelzebul, and May are all variations of the exact same character concept, the Raiden character, so to speak. However, everyone just calls them XPs. No one actually uses the term variations, other than me, I guess, but that's irrelevant. And by the way, I am not bringing up this whole variance topic just to shill my own Simulanka video. This concept is about to be relevant right now. You see, I derived the king from the Usurper King, which is the title that Nouvellette uses in reference to Celestia's ruler, who should be Phanes. But I don't think this Phanes is necessarily the same androgynous Primordial One who first descended into the world. Here is why. In Before Sun and Moon, the Scribe of Istaroth writes that the Primordial One created 4 shades of itself, but these 4 shades are not perfect copies of itself or even identical but weaker versions of the Primordial One. It's not like the Descender underwent mitosis and pooped out 4 copies of itself. No. What the Primordial One did seems more akin to separating itself into 2 halves. The reason I can even attempt to make such a claim is due to the fact that the 4 shades are female. Well, at least 3 of them are confirmed to be. There is Renova, represented by the Plume of Death, Istaroth, represented by the Sands of Aeon, and the Shade of Life. We currently don't know her Ars Goetia name, but she's definitely the Flower of Life. As for the 4th and last shade, represented by the Goblet of Eonothem, the 2 most likely suspects are the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles and Paimon. Now, if you ask me, although I think both are possible, I would lean more in favor of Asmodee, only because the artifact pieces representing her, the Goblet of Eonothem, is actually called the Cup of the Void in both Japanese and Chinese, and if you look at Asmodee, she is a very clear XP of a character from the Honkai series called Sirin, the Hersher or Ruler of the Void, with both being character variations of Kiana Kaslana. Asmodee also has space manipulation abilities, so it kinda makes sense for her to be the Shade of Void or Space. Thus, it is highly likely that the 4 shades of the first Descender are all female, and I strongly suspect that all 4 belong to the same half of the Primordial One, specifically the Lunar Queen. In Western alchemy, and we all know how important alchemy is to Genshin, the Lunar Queen is one of the 2 opposites required to realize the magnum opus, and she symbolizes the whitening or albedo stage. The other half is the Solar King, the Sun, symbolizing either gold or red, but much more commonly red. And it is this Solar King which I believe is the other half of the Primordial One, the half that remained when the 4 shining shades were separated from it. I am using the word remains here on purpose because given that the Primordial One was androgynous in nature, if the female part is removed, what's left behind would logically have to be the male portion, the king. On the topic of logic, the artifact set piece representing this king is very fittingly the Circlet of Logos, or as it's known in Chinese and Japanese, the Crown of Reason. In the past, Seelis served as Celestia's angelic envoys, and based on Ualtekuten's relationship with Runova, we can reasonably infer that these angels answered to the Four Shining Shades, which might help explain why every single angel we know of so far is female. That or Hoyoverse are just setting up an entire species of cute anime waifus that they can sell in the future. Honestly, both explanations are possible. So given the angels' close association with the Four Shades, it is not surprising at all that the Triquetra, a major symbol of the Moon Sisters whom the angels served, can also be found on the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles, who is very likely to be a shade of the Primordial One. However, in this video I am not suggesting that the Moon Sisters are three of the Four Shades. This is a discussion that I believe is best reserved for another time, but to give you a hint at my current thought process, I wonder if the Four Shades usurped the functions of the three Moon Sisters sometime after their other half, the King, usurped the role of the Heavenly Father Nibelung, thereby becoming the new logic or logos of the world. As I said though, this is just a concise summary of what I think. The full discussion is better left for another time in the future. For now, I want to focus on the Tsaritsa and her connections with logic. You see, identifying a deity as logic is a very powerful descriptive tool for conveying the nature of the entity in question. In Orthodox Christianity, even though the concept of logic itself is not God, the Holy Trinity is considered the embodiment of logic. This is a real thing, by the way. In Greek, God is also referred to as the Logos, the foundational principle that encompasses divine order, where from logic comes reason, the source of rationality and the structure of existence. If the Circlet of Logos, or the Crown of Reason, as it is called in Chinese, is anything to go by, this is the kind of authority that the Tsaritsa is going up against, and let me tell you, that makes the Usurper King one hell of an intimidating foe. At first glance, controlling logic and reason does not sound as impressive as authorities over life, death, time, and void. When you think about it for a bit though, you will realize that logic and reason are the divine principles through which all aforementioned forces are governed, something symbolized very fittingly with the king's crown. So, one would wonder how the Tsaritsa plans to take on such an incredibly powerful deity, and perhaps more importantly, can you actually defeat the ruler of the world's very logic? Oddly enough, the possibility appears to be a non-zero one, otherwise Pierro and the Tsaritsa wouldn't even attempt such a feat, and if anything, what just transpired with Focalors in Fontaine likely strengthens their resolve. You see, according to Neuvillettes' vision story, Nibelung's Great War of Vengeance injured the Usurper King so severely that it lost its ability to suppress the original order of the world with divine authority. Fast forward to 500 years ago, the aftermath of Conria's cataclysm likely only served to exacerbate the king's condition to the point where the heavenly principles remained silent even after one of the seven destroyed her divine throne and surrendered both the Gnoses and the authority of water to one of the planet's primordial dragons. What's going on here is one of two things. Either Celestia are pulling off some insane 300 IQ move by fooling everyone into thinking that the Heavenly Principles is incapacitated, then use that as a bait to lure all of their enemies into a trap, or the Abyss Twins' suspicion is correct and the Usurper King's order is in shambles right now, leaving it exposed from every side. According to Barbatos, the Cryo-Archon's attitude towards Celestia and the gods in general changed dramatically following Conria's cataclysm 500 years ago. Likely around the time she met and allied with the Fatui's founder, Pierro. When it comes to the Tsaritsa herself, we know that she is not one of the original seven, but we barely know anything about her as a goddess, and practically next to nothing about her predecessor. Although I wouldn't be surprised if the Tsaritsa's predecessor has already been hinted at in one of Genshin Impact's many fairy tale books and stories. Funny enough, even the nature of her divine ideal is currently unconfirmed by the developers, and is therefore still up for speculation, with the most widely agreed upon option being love, based on how Dainsleif describes her in the Teyvat Travail trailer. Now, if you ask me, I actually think she is the goddess of either grace or compassion, or possibly even virtue, since those ideals encompass love but also allow for one to make difficult sacrifices which may seem counterintuitive to love but are ultimately for the greater good. A position which the Tsaritsa has certainly found herself in for the past 500 years. With that being said, the most important detail about Snezhnaya's current Cryo Archon, and the reason, get it, reason, I made this whole video is the fact that she is most likely going to be a Genshin variation of the quote-unquote Bronya character, for the lack of a better term. Pretty much like how Scaramouche, Baal, and Beelzebul are all variations of the Raiden character, or even the Misei Nanatsuki character, if you wanna get super technical. Fun fact, do you know who else is a modern variation of the Misei Nanatsuki character? Sokaku is, the blue Oni from Zenless Zone Zero. This is why in her ultimate animation she shouts and says,
I can also become an Asura!
By the way, so is Tsukishiro Yanagi. She too is an evolution of the Misei Nanatsuki character, which is totally not apparent at first until you look deeper into her backstory and realize that she took in the blood and powers of an Oni, which is how she got her Devil Trigger and all her other cool lightning abilities she has. In fact, these Nanatsuki roots might unironically be why Yanagi's theme, which you are listening to right now, sounds quite similar to that of the Raiden Shogun. Of course, I wouldn't go as far as to say that Sokaku and Yanagi are direct variations of Raiden Mei, like for example Acheron and Dr. Mei, those are clear-cut variants. But I suppose the most appropriate way for me to put it is that if you go far back enough in time, all these characters such as Acheron, Scaramouche, Yanagi, Mei, Sokaku, and Baal share a common ancestor in Misei Nanatsuki. Common ancestor. Now that I think about it, I actually like this term. You know what? I'm gonna just use it in the future. See guys, this is what we're all about over here. Efficiency. Inventing new terminology for Hoyoverse's games on the go. And by inventing, I mean ripping off pre-existing biological terminology and repurposing them for waifu gambling simulators. Anyway, wait. This video is supposed to be about the Usurper King and the Tsaritsa. How the hell did I get to Yanagi? Alright, no more continental sidetracks. Back to Bronya. Based on my, educated guess, I highly suspect that Bronya is what the Tsaritsa will look like in Genshin. Again, this is purely based on my educated guess and nothing else at all. This detail is important because Bronya happens to be the Herrscher of Reason in Honkai Impact 3rd, which is essentially a fancy way to say ruler of reason in that game, a very important position once held by Welt Yang before Bronya Zacic succeeded him. That's the same Welt currently traveling with the Nameless of the Astral Express. Oh, and I don't mean the same Welt as in an XP or variation, he is legit the exact same man, he directly knows Bronya. He doesn't know Teyvat's Bronya though. Well, yet. But if the Tsaritsa is anything like her Honkai Impact counterpart, then the pursuit of reason and logic is certainly something I could see in her future. Earlier in the video, I briefly mentioned how the king is going to be a tremendously difficult enemy for the Fatui to take down, primarily because I don't see how you can feasibly defeat or destroy logic and reason. Unless you scroll on Twitter for more than 10 seconds, that will do it. But thankfully the Cryo Archon's rebellion is going to be taking place on Teyvat and not on Twitter. So back to our original conundrum. Can you really kill the logic of the world? No, I don't think it's possible. Even the Primordial One didn't do such a thing, since, as I postulated before, the King and the Four Shades appear to have usurped the laws and order of the world from Nibelung and his dragons, with the heavenly principles replacing Nibelung as the logic of the new world. It is unrealistic for logic to be entirely removed, at least not without the complete annihilation of all life. Instead, I think it can only be replaced with another. For that, you require a will which rivals an entire world, and such outsider wills are what the Fatui classify as descenders. This is why Dottore, Pierro, and the Tsaritsa are gathering the 7 Gnoses. According to Surtalogi's disciple, Skirk, along with Neuvillette, these divine shards were carved out of the third Descender's remains by the king and the second throne of heaven, then granted to the 7 victors of the Archon War to become the rulers of the material realm. Regardless, I doubt that the Fatui are going to use the Gnoses to resurrect the third Descender so that it may become the new Logos of the world. The biggest problem with this thought process, which I often don't see taken into consideration, is that if the Tsaritsa, Pierro, and Dottore are really trying to bring back the third Descender, then they would be entirely banking on whether or not this Descender, whoever it may be, has goals and objectives which align with their own, and that is a massive gamble to take. We must keep in mind that we have no idea what kind of deity the third Descender was, and for all we know, it might have very well been allied with Celestia. It's currently unknown if the Usurper King and the second who came betrayed the third Descender to create the Gnoses. Perhaps following the Great War of Vengeance, the third Descender simply sacrificed itself after the king lost authority over the world and offered its power to Celestia. Alternatively, the third Descender could be the Prince of Light, who was betrayed by the Kandrian 6 Pygmies, with those Pygmies of course being Dainsleif and the 5 evil sinners. Although, if this is the case, then there would certainly be some time or memory manipulation shenanigans going on for the story of the Pale Princess to line up with the Archon War. What I am trying to say is that unless Pierro and the Tsaritsa can somehow determine the behavior of the third Descender, like maybe he is the Prince of Light and the Tsaritsa was one of his angel followers or something along those lines, then resurrecting such a powerful god is an extremely risky maneuver. Instead of rolling the dice like that, I believe the Fatui will use the 7 Gnoses to manufacture a new supreme god with a world-rivaling will to replace the king, just as the Usurper King once replaced Nibelung before him. Dottore already used the Electro-Gnosis to forge a prototype god out of Scaramouche and subjected him to a rigorous burn-in test against Boer and the Traveler in order to identify all the flaws in his design. As a side note, the artificial god Zandiq designed was also known as Shukinokami the Prodigal, where the Prodigal title is a direct reference to the parable of the prodigal son told by Jesus Christ in chapter 15 of Luke. Now, Scaramouche's life mirrors the parable's tale, as it is easy to see how Kunikuzushi was the prodigal son who left his homeland and then joined the Fatui as their 6th harbinger. But there could be a double meaning to this naming choice. Depending on how things play out in the future, the 11 Harbingers, who, when including Pierro, actually form a group of 12, appear to be positioned as symbolic counterparts to Jesus' 12 disciples or apostles, which is definitely a strong hint towards the kind of god who the Fatui are attempting to either create or resurrect. Based on what we have seen so far from them, if the Tsaritsa and Pierro's grand plan ends up succeeding, then it seems like their objective will involve the complete incineration of what they call the Old World. Keep in mind this Old World is Teyvat, since the New World will be whichever one they end up creating with their new logic and reason. Here's the thing though, it's not just Pierro and the Tsaritsa who want to set the world ablaze. Remember that Zandiq is working alongside them. Zandiq is a dangerous man, and we have yet to see what kind of blasphemy he plans to partake in when his magnum opus burns the old world to dust. Earlier in this video, while discussing the alchemical side of the Primordial One's 2 halves, the Solar King and the Lunar Queen, whose union is an essential step for the magnum opus, I also brought up how Hoyoverse's developers love creating XPs of their characters, or variations as I call them in my Simulanka analysis. And these variants aren't always utilized across different games. In many cases, you can have multiple variants in the same game who are also completely different people. Take Bronya and Silverwolf from Honkai Star Rail for example, or better yet, my personal favorite example to illustrate this idea, the literal army of Kianas in Honkai Impact. I mean, hold on, let's go through some of them. We have K423, she is the main Kiana. Then we have Kalin, Sirin, Theresa, Cecilia, Kevin, and Durandal, who is the real main Kiana. These are all different variations of the Kiana character. And honestly, since the Sustainer of Heavenly Principles is clearly another variation of Qiyana, specifically Siren, the Hersher of the Void, the first Descender as a whole might be another Qiyana XP. Think about it like this. The Sustainer has an Ars Goetia name, Asmodei, a derivative of Asmodeus from the Lesser Key of Solomon, just like how Ronova and Istaroth are derived from Ronove and Astaroth. While King Solomon in this context, the one who owns and offers the demon names, would most logically be the King of Celestia. Therefore, if the Primordial One really split itself into two halves, with one half becoming the four shining shades, then the shades' appearance would be a reflection of the first Descender's true form. At the moment, it is impossible to confirm this theory until we see what at least one other aspect of the Primordial One looks like. However, it shouldn't be surprising to anyone if the King and his four shades are all variations of Qiyana Kaslan. And I am not talking about Qiyana from Honkai Impact. I am talking about the original Qiyana Kaslana from Fly Me to the Moon. If true, each of the Primordial One's 5 aspects, the rulers of life, death, void, time, and reason, would all be XPs of Qiyana Kaslana's many variations throughout the Hoyoverse. The ruler of void, for instance, is an XP of Siren, and the two share a common ancestor with K423. I can't believe I'm using that term. Anyway, yeah. The ruler of reason, in this case, the master of the 7 archons, Teyvat's demiurge, should be a variation of either Kevin or Siegfried Kaslana. Both would fit the role of the Solar King or the Usurper King. Keep in mind that I am not saying they will strictly all be Qiyana variants, but at the very least they will each inherit some things from Qiyana. Take Paimon, for example. We don't know what her role is in all of this Celestia stuff, but she has an Ars Goetia name, and she looks like some kind of mishmash between Qiyana and maybe Zila too. But this is what I think, and I invite you all to let me know what your takes are down in the comments. Since this video will be coming out, I believe, on the last day of the year 2024, I want to take this opportunity to wish you all a very happy and blessed new year. 2025 is looking very promising, with a lot of cool stuff around the corner, and I, for one, have a bunch of new ideas planned for the near future. Even Hoyoverse seems to be capitalizing on this opportunity, because not only is version 5.3 going live on New Year's Eve, but the trailer for Star Rail's upcoming World of Amphorius is set to release on January 1st, and I am super excited for Amphorius. I already told you guys how much I love Greek mythology. At any rate, as always, a huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel on Patreon, and thank you for watching till the end. For now, I've been My Name for Now, and I will catch you in the new year of 2025. Stay strong and take care.